I learned early that if you let people think you are fragile, they stop asking questions. They stop looking too closely. And sometimes that is the only way to survive what you've done. By the time my hands began to shake in my 70s, everyone thought it was age. Arthritis, nerves, the slow betrayal of a body that had lived too long. My children would gently take things from my grip, cups of tea, heavy plates, important papers. "Let me do it, Mama," they'd say, with that mix of pity and love that made my chest ache. They never noticed how steady my hands became when I was alone. They never noticed how my mind, though tired, was still sharp enough to remember every single detail of the night I changed all our lives. I didn't correct them. I let them believe I was weak. I leaned into it. I let my voice quiver, let my eyes water easily, let my silence be mistaken for confusion instead of calculation. Weak women are forgiven for many things. Weak women are rarely suspected of anything at all. I was not always like this. Once I was loud. Once I laughed with my whole body, throwing my head back, clapping my hands. I argued, I dreamed. I loved fiercely and recklessly, the way young women do before life teaches them the cost of honesty. I married a man who filled rooms with his presence. He spoke, and people listened. I stood beside him, smiling, nodding, shrinking just enough to make him comfortable. That was my first lesson. People prefer you smaller than you really are. We built a family that looked perfect from the outside. Sunday dinners, birthday candles, matching pajamas at Christmas. But inside that house, there were things we never named. Things that sat heavy in the corners like furniture you learned to walk around without ever acknowledging. My husband had a temper that could turn a room cold in seconds. My children learned to read the air, learned when to be loud and when to disappear. And I learned how to absorb damage quietly, how to smooth things over, how to make peace where there should have been confrontation. They called me gentle, patient, long-suffering. They said I was the glue that held us together. I let them believe that too. It was easier than telling the truth, which was that I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I ever stopped holding everything in. The night it happened, the house was unusually quiet. The children were grown by then, living their own lives, calling on Sundays out of habit more than need. My husband and I rattled around the house like strangers who knew each other too well to pretend anymore. That evening, he had been drinking. I could smell it on him before he even spoke. That sharp, sour edge that meant the night would not end peacefully. We argued about something small. We always did. A misplaced bill. A comment that landed wrong. Years of resentment don't need a big spark. They only need an excuse. His voice rose. Mine stayed calm. That contrast made him angrier. He said things that had been waiting decades to be said. He told me I was nothing without him. That I'd be lost if he were gone. That I was weak. Something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. It was a quiet break, like a thread finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. I remember thinking, with startling clarity, that I did not want to spend the rest of my life walking on eggshells in my own home. I remember thinking of my children, grown and free, and realizing that I was the only one still trapped. When it was over, the house was silent again, too silent. I stood there for a long time, listening to my own breathing, waiting for the panic to come. It didn't. What came instead was a cold, terrifying calm. I understood, in that moment, that my life had split cleanly in two, the woman I had been and the woman I would have to become. I did what needed to be done, slowly, carefully. I thought of every detail, every question that might be asked, every story that would make sense to people who already believed I was frail and dependent. Grief is expected in widows, confusion is forgiven, weakness is rarely challenged. By morning I was shaking for real, not from guilt but from exhaustion. When they came, when the words were spoken softly and solemnly, I cried just enough. I clutched my chest. I looked small in my robe, swallowed by it. I answered questions with half sentences, with pauses that suggested shock instead of strategy. No one looked at me twice. In the years that followed, I perfected the role. I let my children take over the things that mattered: finances, decisions. I pretended not to understand documents I had once handled with ease. I forgot things on purpose. I asked for help even when I didn't need it. Every act of dependence was another layer of protection, another brick in the wall between the truth and the people I loved. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit in the dark and wonder if this was my punishment, to live out my days pretending to be less than I was, carrying a secret so heavy it bent my spine. Other times I felt a strange sense of victory. I was safe. I was finally at peace. And no one suspected that the weakest woman in the room was the one who had orchestrated everything. I told myself I would take the truth to my grave. That was the plan. That was always the plan. But plans, like people, have a way of unraveling with time. And the older I get, the more I realize that secrets don't disappear just because you hide them well. They wait. And one day, whether you are ready or not, they ask to be seen. The years after that blurred together in a way I never expected. Time didn't march forward, it seeped. Days folded into weeks, weeks into years, all of it soft around the edges, like fabric worn thin from too much handling. People told me I was strong for surviving, then corrected themselves and said gentle, as if strength would contradict the version of me they preferred to believe. I smiled at that. I let my shoulders curve inward. I let my voice stay low. My children visited more often at first. Grief made them attentive, careful with me, as if I might shatter if they spoke too loudly. They brought casseroles, fixed leaky faucets, insisted I move closer to one of them. I refused, but not firmly. I let my refusals sound like fear instead of resolve. I don't want to be a burden, I'd say, and watch their faces soften with reassurance. They didn't hear what I wasn't saying, that I needed my house, my space, my familiar walls to keep the story intact. This house knew me. It had witnessed everything. Every lie sits more comfortably where the truth once lived. At night, I dreamed in fragments. Sometimes it was just sound, the clink of glass, the rise of a voice, the sharp inhale before words meant to wound. Other times, it was worse. I would wake with my heart racing, convinced I had spoken aloud, that I had confessed in my sleep, that the walls had finally betrayed me. But mornings always arrived quietly, sunlight through curtains, birds, the reassuring ordinariness of being undiscovered. People from church stopped by, old friends, distant relatives. They spoke about him with careful reverence, smoothing his rough edges into something almost kind. He loved you so much, they'd say, as if love erased cruelty, as if affection and harm could not share the same body. I nodded. I dabbed my eyes. I thanked them for their concern. Inside, something hardened. Not guilt, clarity. I realized how desperately people want a story that makes sense, even if it's a lie, especially if it's a lie. I became very good at giving them that. My body began to betray me in small, useful ways, a stumble here, a dropped plate there. My hands did start to ache, but not nearly as much as I let on. When doctors asked questions, I answered vaguely. Memory issues, maybe, anxiety, the polite language of decline. I watched as my children exchanged worried glances, as decisions were quietly removed from my reach. Power handed over without a fight. What they didn't understand was that this was still control, just a different shape of it. There were moments, small, sharp moments, when I almost told someone. Once my eldest daughter sat at my kitchen table long after sunset, her tea gone cold. She looked at me the way she had as a child, searching my face for answers she didn't know how to ask for. "Mom," she said softly, "were you happy? With him?" The question hovered between us, heavy and dangerous. I could have said no. I could have said the truth in pieces. But truth has a way of unraveling everything around it once you tug at the thread. So I smiled sadly. I said what she needed to hear. "We had good years," I told her, "like everyone." She nodded, relieved. The conversation drifted somewhere safer, and I hated myself for how easy it was. As the years passed, I noticed something unsettling. I was becoming invisible, not just unthreatening, but unseen. People talked over me. Decisions were made in rooms I wasn't invited into. I had wanted this, hadn't I? Safety in smallness. And yet, there were days when the weight of being underestimated pressed harder than the secret itself. To be known as weak is its own kind of erasure. Still, invisibility has its advantages. No one watches closely. No one asks why you linger too long over old boxes in the attic, why you keep certain things and discard others. I went through his belongings slowly, methodically, not out of sentiment but necessity. Papers, letters, objects that carried stories, anything that might raise questions disappeared, piece by piece, until all that remained was what aligned with the version of him people preferred to remember. I told myself this was kindness, for my children, for myself, for the dead. But there was one thing I could never bring myself to get rid of. It sat hidden where no one ever looked, wrapped carefully, preserved against time. Proof, not of what he had been, but of what I had done. I told myself I kept it as a reminder, a talisman of sorts, a warning. The truth was uglier. I kept it because some part of me needed to know that it had all been real, that I hadn't imagined the breaking point or the calm that followed. Age has a way of stripping away illusions. As my body slowed, my mind wandered more freely. I began to think about endings, about what stories survive us, about how much of ourselves we owe to the people we leave behind. I wondered if silence was a gift or a theft, if my children deserved to know the full truth of the woman who raised them, or if the version they loved was enough. Sometimes I imagined telling them everything. I pictured their faces, the shock, the disbelief, the reevaluation of every memory. I imagined the word they would never say out loud, but would think anyway: monster, savior, liar, victim. None of them fit neatly, and that terrified me. So I stayed quiet. I leaned harder into the role. I let myself be helped, corrected, dismissed. I let weakness become my armor. And as the years stacked up behind me, I began to understand something I hadn't expected at all. The hardest part wasn't living with what I'd done. It was living with how easy it had been to convince everyone I was incapable of it. I had long since accepted that the truth would never leave me. It clung to my skin, to my bones, seeping into my very cells, but it had grown quieter over time. The guilt, the weight of what I had done, it became something I carried without thinking about it, something that blended into the rhythm of my daily life, like a song played too, many times. But that didn't mean it had disappeared. It simply retreated into the shadows, waiting for moments when I might forget my own careful artifice. Then came the day when the silence cracked. It was a summer afternoon, one of those oppressive, thick days when the air felt like it was holding its breath. My daughter Claire had come over for a visit. It had been weeks since I'd seen her, and I could tell from the way she entered the house that something was wrong. She was quiet, tense, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes, those eyes that had once been so full of innocence, now held something heavier, something I couldn't name. She'd been quieter lately, pulling away, spending more time with her own children. The pang of loss in my chest was familiar, but today she seemed different. She seemed determined. We sat in the living room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan the only sound in the room. She sipped her tea in a way that seemed almost mechanical, the cup shaking slightly in her hands, as though she were bracing herself for something. I watched her in silence, my heart beating just a little too loudly. "I've been thinking," she said, finally breaking the tension. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the slight tremor beneath it. "About Dad." I froze, my fingers gripping the edge of the armchair, but I didn't let myself move. My daughter was many things, kind, perceptive, but she had never been one to dig too deeply. Not until now. "About Dad?" I asked, my voice betraying none of the fear I felt. Claire nodded slowly. "About everything, really. How he was, how we were. I think I understand some things now that I didn't before." I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach, but I forced myself to meet her eyes. "Understand what?" She paused, her gaze shifting away, as if she was sorting through her thoughts, finding the right words. She was searching, I could tell, searching for something that wasn't clear, something that had been buried for too long. "I found something," she said quietly. "A letter. An old one." I felt the blood drain from my face, the world tilting slightly. It had been years since I had carefully hidden all traces of that night. It had been years since I'd thought about those letters, those memories. Yet here she was, holding the thread that could unravel everything. I didn't know how to respond. Words seemed to fail me in that moment. I wanted to speak, to tell her not to look, to tell her that it was better left forgotten. But the silence between us thickened, and I could see it in her face. She already knew. She had already started putting pieces together. I didn't want to believe it, she continued, her voice shaking now, her hands trembling in her lap. But when I read it was like everything made sense. All the things we never talked about, all the things that didn't add up. She looked up at me then, her eyes wide and searching, like she was asking a question I didn't want to answer. Did you know what was really happening? All those years, Mom. Did you know? I stared at her, and in that moment, I saw everything I had feared coming to life. The judgment, the pain in her eyes, the understanding that I had never wanted her to have. I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who believed everything was black and white, right and wrong. And I saw the woman she had become, the one who was beginning to see the cracks in the story I had so carefully woven. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words stuck. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that she had misunderstood. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. Not anymore. She took a deep breath, like she was gathering the courage to hear my truth. I don't know why I never asked before, she whispered. Maybe I didn't want to know. But I can't keep pretending, not anymore. I blinked, my throat tightening, and in that moment I knew that I couldn't hide forever. I had spent my life burying the truth under layers of silence and subtle manipulation, but Claire was no fool. She wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't the woman I had once been. The silence between us stretched, thick and uncomfortable. My hands felt clammy in my lap. I could feel the weight of all those years pressing down on me, like 1,000 eyes waiting for an answer. Mom, please, Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please tell me the truth. I can't live with the lies anymore, not even if they were for us, for me. I looked at her then, really looked at the woman she had become. She wasn't the little girl I had shielded. She was strong, capable, and she deserved the truth, even if it broke her, even if it broke me. I could feel my heart pounding, my breath shallow as the weight of it all pressed in. And as I sat there, knowing I could no longer carry this secret alone, I made a choice. The choice I had been avoiding for so long. I leaned forward, steadying myself. It's time, I whispered, barely above the breath in my lungs. It's time to tell you everything. And so, with trembling hands and a heart full of years' worth of silence, I began to speak. Every word that had been buried for so long came rushing out, each one like a stone in the river of my past, finally flowing free. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The truth, no matter how dark, was the only thing that could set us both free. As I spoke, the weight of the words felt like an avalanche, burying me in years of secrets and regrets. I had spent so much time convincing myself that silence was the best option, that lying through omission was somehow the kinder route. But in that moment, as I saw Claire's face, her eyes wide with shock and confusion, I realized the harsh truth. By keeping this from her, I hadn't protected her. I had only kept her in the dark, forcing her to build her life on a foundation that had always been cracked. I never wanted you to know, I began, my voice quivering. I never wanted you to carry any of this. I thought if I pretended, if I let you believe I was weak and fragile, then you'd be safe. But it was a lie. It was all a lie. Claire leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the chair, her breath shallow. I could see her struggling to process the weight of what I was telling her. The pieces were falling into place, but she didn't know how to put them together yet. She was still holding on to the version of the past she had always known, the one where her father had been strong, where I had been the patient, enduring wife. My throat tightened as I continued. Your father. He was not who you think he was. He wasn't just difficult or demanding. He was dangerous. In ways I never told you. In ways you'll never understand unless you hear the truth. I stopped, taking a shuddering breath, trying to gather my strength. Claire's face was a mask of disbelief, her eyes darting between mine and the floor, as if the words themselves might fall away if she ignored them. But you... You never said anything. You always told us everything was fine. You always made excuses for him. Her voice broke, as if she were talking herself into a new reality. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you protect us from him? The question hit me like a punch to the stomach. It was the question I had asked myself 1,000 times over the years. Why had I stayed? Why had I let it all happen? I had buried those questions deep inside me because the answers were too painful, too shameful. I had believed that protecting my family from the truth was somehow more important than confronting the truth myself. I thought I was protecting you, I said softly. I thought if I made everything look normal, if I kept the peace, you would never have to know the things he did, the things I endured. But you suffered, she whispered, her voice breaking. You suffered, and you kept it from us. I nodded, the weight of those words settling over me. I had kept so much hidden, so much pain locked away because I thought that was what a mother did, shield her children from the ugliness of the world. But in doing so, I had created an illusion of safety, and when the truth finally surfaced, it threatened to shatter everything. I thought I was strong for bearing it all, I admitted. But really, I was just afraid. I was afraid of what would happen if I let anyone know the truth. I didn't want to lose you, lose our family. I didn't want you to think badly of him or of me. I thought if I stayed quiet long enough, if I played my part well enough, everything would just go away. There was a long silence. Claire sat back, her hands trembling slightly as she processed everything I had said. Her gaze was distant now, not meeting mine, as if the enormity of what I had revealed had left her speechless. I could see her trying to piece together the memories she had of her father, trying to reconcile the man she had known with the monster I had described. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. How could you let him hurt you like that? How could you let him hurt us? The question cut through me, sharper than anything I had ever felt before. I could feel the tears stinging behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I was afraid, I said simply, the truth of it sitting like a stone in my chest. I didn't know how to escape. And when you're in that kind of situation, when you've been manipulated for so long, you start to believe that you deserve it. You start to believe that you have no way out. Claire's face softened, the anger and confusion melting into something deeper, something closer to sadness, to understanding. But you did escape, she said softly. You got away from him. You survived. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, Claire, I didn't survive. I just kept going. For years. I kept going because I thought if I didn't, everything would fall apart. But I didn't escape until I did what I had to do. She blinked at me, her eyes wide, as if she was hearing these words for the first time. What do you mean? What did you do? For the first time since I had started telling her, I felt a sharp pang of regret, like a knife twisted in my stomach. I had gotten so close to the edge of the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to cross it. Not yet. I'm sorry, Claire, I whispered, my voice cracking. Some things are too dark to speak about. I can't. I stopped, not knowing how to finish the sentence. Her eyes searched mine, and in that moment, I saw the flicker of understanding pass through her. She might not have known the full truth, but she could feel the weight of the secrets, the things I had never said out loud. You don't have to tell me everything, she said finally, her voice soft and kind, but laced with a sharpness I hadn't expected. But you've given me enough to understand. I need time to process this, to figure out who he really was, and who you were, who you are. Her words were a balm and a wound all at once. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her into my arms and tell her that it would all be okay, but I knew better now. The truth doesn't work like that. It doesn't heal with a hug or a promise. It takes time, and time, as I had learned, is not always kind. Take all the time you need, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I understand. And with that, the silence between us grew thick again. But it was different this time. It wasn't the silence of secrets, the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of truth, a truth that was painful but necessary, a truth that in time would set us both free. The days that followed were heavy with a quiet tension. the kind that lingers in the spaces between people who have just crossed a line they can never uncross. Claire came by less frequently, her visits growing shorter, her silences longer. The warmth she had once shared so freely with me was replaced by a cool distance, as though she were still trying to process everything I had told her. I understood. How could she not? A lifetime of illusions shattered in a single conversation, a reality far darker than she had ever imagined. I stayed in my house, the same house I had lived in for over 50 years, surrounded by the ghosts of the past. I could feel the weight of it all, the weight of the truth I had hidden so well for so long. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, when my mind raced through the details of everything I had said, wondering if I had said too much, if I had ruined everything between us. But then, there were moments too when I felt something I hadn't in years: relief. The burden of carrying this secret for so long had drained me, worn me thin. Telling her, telling Claire, had been the hardest thing I had ever done, but it had also been the only thing that had allowed me to breathe again. As the weeks passed, I tried to reach out to Claire. I called her. I left messages, but the conversations were brief, strained. She was polite, but distant. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the uncertainty about what to say or how to say it, and that hurt more than I could admit. I had expected anger. I had expected rejection, but what I hadn't expected was the distance, the quiet withdrawal. One afternoon, after weeks of silence, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone in my hands. I had told myself I would be patient, that she would come to me when she was ready, but the waiting was becoming unbearable. I couldn't just sit in this limbo anymore, pretending like everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I needed closure. I needed her to see me as I was, not just as a mother, not just as a victim of circumstance, but as a person who had made choices, terrible, difficult choices, and had lived with them. The phone rang. I almost didn't pick it up. The number on the screen was Claire's. My heart skipped in my chest as I took a shaky breath and answered. "Mom," she said, her voice tired but warm. It wasn't the voice of a woman who was angry. It wasn't the voice of someone who had decided to cut me out. It was the voice of someone who had been through something and was still struggling to understand it. "Claire, I've been thinking about you," I said, my voice trembling more than I intended. "I know it's been hard. I know everything has changed. But I just want you to know that I'm here, whatever you need." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long silence that stretched between us like a chasm, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then, she spoke. "I've been thinking too," she said, "about everything you told me, about Dad, about you, and I need to tell you something." I sat up straighter, my breath catching in my throat. "What is it, Claire?" "I'm not angry," she said, her voice soft but firm. I was confused at first, shocked, but now I'm just trying to make sense of it all, and I don't know how to explain it, but I think I understand why you kept so much hidden, why you stayed. I think I'm starting to see who you really are, not just as my mother, but as a person, with your own pain, your own choices. I don't know if I can ever completely understand, but I don't want to lose you, not because of this." My heart felt like it might burst. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The fear, the doubt, the shame, it all melted away in those few words. She wasn't rejecting me. She wasn't condemning me. She was trying, just as I was, to rebuild the pieces of a relationship that had been fractured by the very secrets I had kept to protect her. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve your understanding. But I'm so glad that you're willing to try." Claire was quiet for a moment, and then I heard her sigh, a sound filled with the weight of everything we had been through. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," she said honestly. "But I want to try. I want to understand. I don't want the rest of my life to be about what we didn't say." "I don't know how long it will take," I said, my hands trembling as I clasped them tightly together. "But I'm willing to wait. For you. For us." There was a soft, hesitant laugh from her end of the line. Maybe we both just need time to figure things out." "I think you're right," I said. "But no matter how long it takes, I'll be here. I'll always be here, Claire." I know, she said, and there was something in her voice, something that made my heart ache, that told me she believed it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was hope. A fragile, tentative hope, but a hope nonetheless. The road ahead would be long. It would be full of difficult conversations and uncomfortable silences, but for the first time, I believed that we could navigate it together. The truth had shattered everything I thought I knew, but it had also created something new, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to be seen not just for what I had been, but for who I had become. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The days after that phone call felt like a strange kind of limbo. There were no fireworks, no sudden breakthroughs. But there was something quieter, something deeper, an unspoken understanding between Claire and me that we were both trying to find our way through the wreckage together. I started to understand that healing wasn't going to be a clean, immediate process. It would be slow, full of back and forth, of missteps and progress, of uncomfortable moments that would eventually, in time, give way to something better. I tried not to push her. I knew that. I had spent years pushing myself, forcing myself into a role I didn't truly fit. And now, I needed to allow Claire the space to make her own decisions, to find her own path through the story I had placed in front of her. It was hard, harder than I had anticipated. Every time the phone rang, my heart would skip. My mind would race with possibilities. Was she ready to talk again? Had she forgiven me? Was she angry? But as the weeks passed, the calls became more frequent. The pauses between our conversations grew shorter. I found myself waiting less for her to speak and more for her to ask. One Saturday afternoon, I sat by the window, watching the world outside as I tried to focus on my knitting. The rhythmic motion of the needles was comforting, a routine that grounded me. The house was quiet, and for a moment, I let myself bask in it. The absence of tension, the lack of guilt hanging over my head. But then the doorbell rang. I stood up quickly, unsure of who would be at the door, and when I opened it, I was taken aback. Claire stood there, her hands in her pockets, looking uncertain, but there was something else in her eyes, something like peace, or at least the beginning of it. Her face was still younger than mine, but the softness of childhood was gone, replaced with a kind of maturity I hadn't seen before. I hadn't realized how much she had grown until that moment. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. My heart swelled. I didn't know what she was going to say, but it didn't matter. She was here. She wanted to talk. That was enough. I nodded and stepped aside, letting her into the house. The air between us was still thick with the weight of the past, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. It was something we were both learning to navigate, slowly but steadily. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had spent so many years pretending to be someone I wasn't. The room that had witnessed so many lies, so many secrets, and now, finally, it was witnessing something different, something real. "I've been thinking about what you said," Claire began, her voice soft but steady. "About Dad, about you." I braced myself. I knew this was the moment that would either make or break the fragile bridge we were trying to build. "And?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not going to pretend like I understand everything," she said. "But I've realized that I spent a lot of my life seeing you as my mother, but not really seeing you, if that makes sense. I've been so angry for so long. At him, at you, at everything. But I'm starting to see that there's more to you than just being my mom. You're a person too. You've had your own life, your own pain, and I think I understand that now." My chest tightened, the words I had been waiting so long to hear hanging in the air between us. "Claire, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to keep this from you. But I thought if I could protect you from the truth, you would never have to live with the same pain that I did." She shook her head, a small, understanding smile tugging at her lips. "You were trying to protect me, I get it now. But it wasn't just about me, was it? You were protecting yourself too. From what happened. From the choices you had to make. From the person he was. I don't know how to forgive all of that yet, but I'm trying, and I want to try with you." I felt a rush of emotions, relief, guilt, pride, but mostly gratitude. I didn't deserve her forgiveness, not entirely, but I would spend the rest of my life trying to earn it, trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. "I'm sorry, Claire," I said, my voice breaking as I reached for her hand. "I'm sorry for not being honest with you. I'm sorry for not being the mother you needed when you needed me most." She squeezed my hand gently, her eyes soft. "You were there. You were there in your own way. I think that's what matters." We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us lost in thought, letting the gravity of the conversation settle between us. And then Claire leaned back in her chair and gave me a wry smile, her expression easing just a bit. "I guess I should be thanking you for letting me be mad at you for all these years. It's kind of a nice change from being mad at him." I laughed, the sound coming out shaky but genuine. It felt like the first real laugh I had had in ages. "I'm glad I could provide that for you," I said, my heart swelling with a bittersweet kind of joy. The afternoon passed slowly, each word between us a step closer to healing. There was no magic fix, no sudden resolution, but there was progress. We talked about everything, about the past, about our future, about the things we both needed to forgive. And when Claire left that day, it wasn't with the same distance she had arrived with. She kissed my cheek before she left, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same side again. As I watched her drive away, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I didn't know where this road would take us, how long it would take to fully heal, but for the first time, I believed that we were moving in the right direction. Time, I had learned, was the only thing that could heal wounds as deep as the ones I had carried for so long. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it would be ours. And that for now was enough. Though I had taken the first step in revealing the truth to Claire, I knew that the ripples of what we had shared would continue to spread through both of us. There was a long road ahead, full of healing that would be anything but linear. The secrets I had carried with me, my fear, my shame, the guilt I felt for not being the mother I wanted to be, didn't just disappear the moment I told Claire the truth. Those wounds, old as they were, needed time and care to heal, and there were days when the weight of them would bear down on me again. The same was true for Claire. She had started down her own path of understanding, but I knew that processing the pain of the past, of everything I had hidden from her, would take its toll. She had to learn, in her own time, how to navigate the emotions that came with the truth. And while she wasn't angry with me in the way I had feared, I could see the complexity of it all in her eyes. It was as if the clarity had opened up a floodgate, and she was trying to make sense of everything she had learned about the past, and about me. But that was the nature of healing, wasn't it? It wasn't about immediate resolution or closure. It was about piecing things together, slowly, carefully, with honesty and patience. We were both learning to trust again, not just each other, but ourselves. As for the house, it still held the echoes of the past. The walls, once filled with the tension of secrets and lies, now seemed quieter somehow. I found myself walking through the rooms, touching the familiar objects, thinking back on the years of pretending. And yet, each room felt a little less like a prison now, and more like a place I could truly call home again, with its history and its scars. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I would catch myself wondering how much of my life had been defined by the choices I made, and how much of it had been determined by the choices others had forced upon me. Could I have left him sooner? Could I have spoken up earlier? Could I have been the mother Claire needed from the start? These were questions that would never have clear answers. But for the first time, I was beginning to see that perhaps I hadn't been as powerless as I once thought. And maybe, just maybe, that was where the real healing could begin. Not just for Claire, but for me as well. Because healing wasn't just about facing the past. It was about allowing myself to move forward with it, accepting it as part of who I had become, but not the entirety of who I was still becoming. So yes, there was more left, more work to do, more forgiveness to earn, more words to say. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The truth, though difficult, had set something free inside me. And as I sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun set in a sky painted with shades of orange and pink, I realized that, for the first time, I was ready to step into whatever came next, without fear of the past holding me back. There was still more left to be done, but I was no longer walking alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to carry us both forward. In terms of the emotional journey between Claire and me, the road ahead is still full of potential, full of moments that will either continue to strengthen our bond or challenge us to grow further. There's always something left when it comes to healing, especially when years of unspoken truths, pain, and misunderstandings have shaped a relationship. What Claire and I had started was not an instant resolution, but a transformation. A shift from silence to honesty, from distance to understanding, and that takes time. Though we had made progress, I knew that there would be hard conversations ahead. There would be days when the weight of the past would resurface, days when anger, confusion, or hurt would test the foundations we had started to rebuild. Healing doesn't follow a straight line, after all. It's more like an ebb and flow. Sometimes the waters recede, and sometimes they come crashing in, leaving you with more to face. For me, the next phase of this journey wasn't just about Claire and me. It was about confronting my own deep-rooted fears and understanding that I, too, deserved to heal. I had spent so much of my life protecting everyone else, trying to hold everything together, that I had neglected my own needs. I had lived with the fear of being seen for what I truly was, a woman who had made difficult choices in the face of impossible circumstances. A woman who had survived, but had never truly allowed herself to thrive. So yes, there was more work left to do, for both of us. More steps to take, more conversations to have, and more healing to endure. But in that moment, as the days unfolded, and Claire and I continued our tentative journey toward rebuilding trust, I felt a sense of peace that I had never felt before. The peace that comes not from being perfect, but from being honest, from allowing yourself to be vulnerable and, in doing so, finding strength. There's always something left. That's the beauty of it. The story doesn't end here. It simply changes, shifts into something new, something more authentic. But I am learning to embrace that uncertainty, to trust that even in the unknown, there is growth, there is hope. And for the first time in my life, I am allowing myself to believe that there is still a future ahead. A future where I can stand tall, no longer buried by secrets or fear, but free to live fully and with the people I love. So what's left? Everything. The best parts are still unfolding, and I am ready to walk forward, step by step, wherever this path takes me.